Hello everyone, and welcome to part 4 of Communication Skills Training Lectures. Today we are going to discuss drugs and addictive behavior. Here's an outline of some of the topics that we will discuss in this lecture. We will go over what addiction is, some symptoms of addiction, types of addiction, drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, sex, other addictions, and addiction switching. And we will also discuss skills. What is addiction? Addiction can come in many forms and can be at different levels of severity. An addiction in one person might not show in the same way as it will in somebody else. Addiction is usually perceived as a problem and can be found as a form of coping. Addiction can most easily be found when someone has a dependency in which the need for the item can be seen as important as basic necessity for survival. Usually, someone with an addiction will start using the item or doing an activity because they can describe it as feeling good. A lot of times when people have difficulty coping with an issue in their life, they turn to addictions. The addiction is seen as a problem when the dependency on the item begins to affect their daily functioning. Here are some of the basic symptoms of addiction: unable to limit the activity or use of the substance, craving the activity or use of the substance, tolerance, which is an increase of activity or use to get to the same effect, experience symptoms of withdrawal when trying to stop, lying about the use of substance or extent of behavior, constantly thinking about using. Feelings of guilt, shame, and helplessness are also common symptoms of addiction. Addictions can be found in a variety of forms, so we will look at basic categories that many people fall under. Types of addictions: drugs. Drugs themselves can come in many different forms. Because they are legal, caffeine and tobacco are the most commonly used drugs. Since they're legal, some people might not feel like they have an addiction because they're not doing anything illegal. Both caffeine and tobacco have addictive properties, and while they don't view them as a problem, people in their daily lives might disagree. Over-the-counter drugs and marijuana are also viewed as legal, as they can be prescribed, but overuse and abuse can cause them to be addictive as well. Drugs that are prescribed to relieve pain are often prescribed with the use being as needed due to people having different levels of pain tolerance. Relieving pain is usually associated as a positive feeling, and so some users might choose to abuse the drug in order to experience the positive feeling again. This becomes a bigger issue once the user begins to gain a tolerance to the drug. This can lead the user to seek out stronger drugs or larger dosages in order for them to gain that same positive feeling again. While prescription drugs might be diagnoses for physical issues, other drugs are used for non-physical problems. Some people experiment with hallucinogens in order for them to escape from the reality of their problems. Those who are more overwhelmed by their problems might even consider sedatives to help calm their nerves or help them sleep at night. Those with the opposite problem might choose stimulants like caffeine or cocaine. Once a person starts using drugs, they might also begin to explore different drugs to counteract any side effects that they don't want from using the drug, or to explore other forms of ways of allowing them to get the positive feelings that they get from the drugs. More than 2/3 of the people who abuse drugs also use alcohol as well. Alcohol can become a problem when it becomes a dependency. People have different levels of tolerance, and so it is hard to say how much a person should drink. It is important to differentiate use and abuse when it comes to alcohol. Like any addiction, it is important to identify when the use of alcohol is affecting their daily living. If a person is spending their rent money buying alcohol or drinking so much they miss work or school, odds are they have an addiction problem. There is much debate on whether or not eating disorders should be classified as an addiction. When it comes to substance abuse, the item that is being abused is seen as something that does harm to your body. But where do you draw the line with food? Food is a substance that your body needs to survive, and yet those who suffer with eating disorders have similar traits of a person with addiction. While there are several types of eating disorders, the DSM-5 recognizes 3 more common eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa is the most commonly known eating disorder and involves a person who abstains from eating and may or may not involve the acts of purging. Bulimia nervosa involves the practice of binging and purging as to avoid weight gain. Both of these eating disorders are linked to body image issues, low esteem, perfectionism, and peer pressure, or pressure from their family or loved ones. The third major eating disorder is new to the DSM-5. It is the binge eating disorder, or BED. BED involves periods of excessive eating or eating past the point of fullness, and usually involves the person feeling unable to stop eating. While BED is the least commonly known disorder due to it being the newest, it is actually the most common disorder to affect people. Another type of addiction is sex. Having sex, or some of the fetishes associated with sex, can become an addiction as well. Addictive behavior associated with sex might increase a person's likelihood to cheat on a partner or have multiple partners. Pornography and masturbation could also be considered an addiction and are easier to become addicted to based on its availability. Sex addiction can become a problem when it leads to relational obsession, stalking, crossing boundaries, or other factors that affects the person's ability to function in their daily life. Some other addictions, attributes that can lead to an addiction include the feeling of being rewarding or belonging. Some other addictions could include video games, shopping, gambling, hoarding, collecting, exercise, or binge watching. Most people who have an addiction problem have an addictive personality. It is very common for a person to have multiple addictions at one time or to switch between addictions. Some addictions complement each other or are associated with each other, which can make fighting the addiction even more challenging. When some people choose to fight their addiction, there is a chance that they might become addicted to something that they see as better, but take it to an addictive extreme. This is the part with skills, and we're going to talk about some ways that you can help someone who is struggling with addiction. So the first thing to do is to educate yourself about addiction. If you have never been directly exposed to alcoholism or drug addiction, you may be misinformed about what addiction is, who it affects, and how it affects them. It is important that you do your own research so that you can better understand what the other person is going through. Some great resources to start with include the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Another thing to do is to address the issue. And some ways to better prepare for this conversation include speaking to a professional, remain open-minded, remain non-judgmental. During the conversation, try and stay calm, be open and honest, and let the person know that you are there to listen. Some research treatments. You can start by researching different addiction treatment centers and their offerings. You can go online, request literature, or give them a call, and the more informed you are, the more prepared you will be if you ever encounter someone who is battling an addiction. Here are some key phrases you should never say to someone who is struggling with addiction. These phrases can be very discouraging and may cause a lot of emotional damage to someone who is already in a very vulnerable state. You are not an addict. You don't look like an addict. Why can't you just quit? Why don't you get help? You will always be like this. You should be ashamed of yourself. You are so selfish. So these are the phrases that you should never say to someone struggling with addiction. To conclude this lecture, here is a quiz. Please follow the link to take the quiz for this lecture, and thank you for watching.